Every single year in the NBA, as teams change their rosters, they add new players, they try to add new functions to their team, more versatility, they change things around and try and improve their team, and every offseason, people get excited about these new additions. However, there are a couple of offseason additions that, in my opinion, people are massively overrating the impact they're actually going to have on their teams this season. And we begin with, honestly, the inspiration for the entire video, and that is Christian Wood going to the LA Lakers. Now, for whatever reason, there's this fascination with what Christian Wood could be as an NBA player. Ever since he broke out a couple of seasons ago and then signed in Houston and then went to Dallas and now he's with the Lakers, at every single stop, that fan base gets extremely excited about the scoring upside and the potential and the offensive firepower that Christian Wood brings to your roster. And when he broke out initially and went to Houston, I was kind of the same way. I was like, look at the numbers this guy is putting up. Look at how good he can be offensively. I thought he was going to be good in Houston. And then after that season, I kind of realized, you know what? Maybe there's a reason why he didn't get as big of a contract in Houston as maybe people thought. Maybe there's a reason they were so willing to just dump him to Dallas for a protected first-round pick a season later. Maybe there's a reason that Christian Wood is getting signed in September to a deal. Maybe it's because he's actually not going to be that impactful for this Lakers team. Now, theoretically, I can understand the excitement because traditionally the Lakers would like to have another big, quote-unquote, alongside of Anthony Davis. And they understand that their best lineups involve Anthony Davis at the 5, but if they can put another big out there, at least a bigger body, someone like Christian Wood that also can space the floor, that allows Anthony Davis to function as a 5 without actually really being a true 5, and it doesn't negatively impact your floor spacing the way that it would if in previous iterations you put, JaVale McGee or Dwight Howard out there alongside Anthony Davis. And theoretically, I understand that concept. However, the issue with Christian Wood is two different things. One, offensively, he needs to be way more involved than you would want him to be in order to truly be effective. He's not like a role player level offensive guy. He needs to have the ball. He needs to be in isolation. That's just not what you're going to be doing a lot with Christian Wood. And even though he can space off the ball, something he's not really super willing to do and honestly not that great at either. And then the other thing are the defensive issues. And that has been the biggest reason why he hasn't played as much in his last couple of teams as maybe you would have expected, because he doesn't really have a position that he can guard and guard well. And if you put him alongside Anthony Davis, I can understand being excited about that combination because Wood can in theory space alongside Davis and Davis can make up for a lot of the defensive issues as he did for a lot of the Lakers roster last year as they started to really play well. But the idea that Christian Wood is going to be playing crunch time for this team or be a big time postseason performer doesn't make any sense. I understand the excitement because of the offensive game and the potential and the upside, but it hasn't worked for a couple of different teams. And I find it hard to believe that now suddenly he's going to get it all figured out in LA. And I feel like we are really overrating the impact that Christian Wood is going to have on the Lakers this season. Next up, let's talk about Chris Paul on the Golden State Warriors. Now, I've talked about this in some recent videos, and it was definitely a surprise when they made the move for Chris Paul. We went into that offseason, and the possibility of Chris Paul getting traded from Phoenix was definitely there, definitely something we were aware of, but the idea of him going to Golden State was not really on anybody's radar. And so when it happened, it was kind of hard to digest and figure out exactly what their plan was. But to me, I've always been of the opinion that the primary function of the Chris Paul trade for Golden State was not basketball related. It was to make sure that they got rid of the salary of Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole is someone that, yes, helped them over the last couple of seasons, has developed into a nice young player, but was massively overpaid with an extension that they gave him just last offseason that they were going to be on the books for the next couple of seasons. And this is a guy that when Golden State wants to be their best, when they're in the middle of a finals series and they have their true top level rotation, Jordan Poole's playing like 15 minutes a game. And that's just not something that you can deal with in this new era with the new second apron, the new salary cap rules. Paying that guy $30 million a year to play 15 minutes a game in a potential finals series doesn't make any sense. And so they knew they needed to get rid of the contract. It allowed them to re-sign Draymond this offseason, potentially sign Klay to an extension for next offseason, and getting rid of that contract was the biggest motivator for the deal. However, it seems like a lot of people are acting as if Chris Paul is going to have this massive impact on Golden State, especially now as we're getting rumors that they do actually plan to have him in the starting lineup. I'm kind of a different opinion. I understand why Chris Paul wants to be a starter. He's never come off the bench a game in his NBA career. He's almost 40 years old and he's never come off the bench ever. So being a little bit uneasy about coming off the bench makes total sense. But if you want to start Chris Paul, there's only one lineup in which you can do it. It's Steph, Chris Paul, Klay, Andrew Wiggins, and Draymond Green. You have to bench Kevon Looney. You're not going to bench Wiggins, Klay, Steph, or Draymond. You have to bench Kevon Looney. And I'm not sure that that's their best lineup, nor is it a lineup that they really want to start games with, but they're just going to do it anyway to make Chris Paul happy. And ultimately, when it really comes down to it, when Golden State needs to be the best version of themselves. I'm not convinced that Chris Paul is a part of that lineup depending on the matchup, and I'm not convinced that he's going to have any bigger of a role from a minutes perspective than what Jordan Poole had. When they really need it, you know, maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes a game, probably not starting or ending games, assuming that they're fully healthy. And when they really need to be at their best, I don't think they're really going to care about the feelings of Chris Paul not wanting to come off the bench. And this trade to me has always been more about the money. And yes, Chris Paul is going to help them. But if you think that all of a sudden they're going to get prime Chris Paul and they're going to be doing a ton of, you know, Chris Paul stuff, I really don't think that impact is going to be felt much more than what Jordan Poole already provided, where try and get some offense out there when Steph comes off the floor so that you can be better without Steph on the floor. You can play them together at times so that Steph can run around and do Steph stuff and get, you know, come off screens, try and get open. Clay, same thing. But essentially, they swapped the role of Jordan Poole for Chris Paul and saved a ton of money. And one of those things was much more important to the franchise than the other. Next up is one that might get some people upset, but I'm going to go with it anyway. Bruce Brown in Indiana. Now, Bruce Brown is a good player. There's no denying that. I really liked him when he was in Brooklyn. Obviously fell into a perfect role in Denver, had some really good, good games and big plays in the playoffs and in the finals. However, the idea that Bruce Brown this year is going to be the same level of player that he was last year with Denver doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, because the kind of player that he is works perfectly alongside what Nikola Jokic does. And Nikola Jokic is probably the best player in the entire league at amplifying role player type guys like him, like Aaron Gordon, a couple of other players on their roster. And in Indiana, they've got some good young players. You know, Tyrese Halliburton, Benedict Mathurin. Halliburton especially is a really, really good playmaker. They don't have anybody like Nikola Jokic out there. And so if you're a Pacers fan and you're expecting Bruce Brown to be the same guy that he was last year, that's putting up, you know, all these crazy numbers and having these great games in the postseason, I think that's an unrealistic expectation. He's going to be helpful. Certainly, he can do some on-ball creation stuff for you depending on the lineup. He can guard, he can space off the ball. He's going to be a great cutter, rebounder, energy, effort guy. But, and I think they knew this when they signed him to the deal, you're not going to get $20 million worth of value out of Bruce Brown this season, which is fine for them. They just wanted to add a nice role player to their roster. They wanted to add someone that was going to be able to help. But I think that some people were maybe seeing the way Bruce Brown played in Denver and thinking it's going to exist in the exact same way in Indiana. And to me, that is a massive overreaction and overrating of what Bruce Brown's actually going to provide this year in Indiana. Last up, let's talk about Kristaps Porzingis in Boston. Now, generally speaking, I like the addition of Porzingis because they didn't really have to give up that much. You know, their roster is improved, I would say, from last season, partially because of the addition of Kristaps Porzingis. But there's two issues here. One, the injury issues, which has already been a problem for them with Porzingis recovering from an offseason injury. That's always going to be something you're going to have to deal with for him. So it's this weird line where you want him to be a significant part of your team. He was a borderline all-star caliber guy last year, but it's hard to really count on him and hard to really, really think that he's going to be a big part of your team on a night-to-night basis when you never know if he's going to be healthy, which makes it difficult to create like a cohesive team concept that you're going to need in Boston if you're trying to make the finals or potentially win a title this year. And the other problem is how exactly he fits alongside the other bigs, those being Robert Williams or Al Horford. Given the way that they like to guard with their different coverages, especially in ball screen situations, Porzingis's, inability to guard in specific situations is very similar to someone like Robert Williams. And yes, offensively, that'll work. Porzingis can space, Robert Williams can be at the rim. That is fine. But defensively, I struggle to see a scenario in which Robert Williams and Kristaps Porzingis work really well together, depending on the lineup. And that's my big concern here, is I think everybody's thinking about the offense. They're thinking about the floor spacing, and absolutely that's going to be there. He's a legitimate threat beyond the three-point line, not only just as a shooter, but as a guy that can attack closeouts. That's something that neither Al Horford nor Robert Williams provide them. It's something that they lost as well with losing Grant Williams in the offseason. Kristaps Porzingis, if healthy, is going to help this team offensively, but I have serious question marks about some redundancy between his skill set defensively and Robert Williams's. And at a certain point, when you have that level of redundancy, your ability to actually improve the team overall is limited. And even though I like the addition overall, I do think generally speaking, we're overrating it because we actually saw healthy Porzingis last year, which there's no guarantee we're going to get that this year. And we're not really thinking as much about some of the defensive issues they could have trying to play those two bigs together at the same time. Those are my most overrated additions from this NBA offseason. To be clear, I can't wait to see these guys on their new teams, but I'm skeptical about the actual positive impact they're going to have.